Snow covered the isolated working dog training center, its kennel silent beneath the pale winter morning. A former Navy SEAL arrived with his blind niece, who chose the German Shepherd others avoided. Days later, that same dog blocked a stranger who appeared outside their remote cabin after dark. Then the man spoke, and his voice pulled her back to the night her parents died. What began as a personal threat soon pointed toward missing fuel, old records, and forgotten families. Why had someone returned after 8 years? And what had her father discovered before everything went wrong? Stay with this story to the end. Please like and subscribe for more journeys of loyalty and healing. The snowplow had not reached the Bennett Road yet when Mara tapped the third porch step with her boot and said, "You moved the shovel again." Graham Hale stopped halfway to the truck. At 47, he was tall, lean through the shoulders, with short dark brown hair graying at the temples, and a trimmed beard sharpening an already angular face. His camouflage field shirt was hidden beneath an olive-insulated jacket, but the black tactical watch on his left wrist remained visible. 2 feet to the right. I know where 2 feet is. I was clearing ice. You were also clearing my memory. Mara stood beside the rail in a navy parka, dark sunglasses over her pale blue-gray eyes, white cane in one gloved hand. She had turned 18 6 weeks earlier. Graham picked up the shovel and returned it to its usual place. "Thank you," she said. Hearthpine lay quiet beneath fresh snow, a small mountain village of timber houses, a general store, a church, and narrow roads cut between pines. On the drive, Mara kept one hand near the heater vent. "I don't want a guide dog. You've said that. I want a companion. One I choose." Graham kept his eyes on the road. "High Timber knows what we're looking for. They know what you told them we're looking for." For 8 years, Graham had built his life around keeping her safe. He knew every loose stairboard in their cabin, every winter closure, every neighbor who could reach Mara if he could not. He called it preparation. Mara had recently started calling it something else. High Timber Working Dog Center stood outside the village on fenced acreage, bordered by pine forest. Dinah Kerr met them inside. At 44, she had ash-blonde hair tied low, a charcoal training vest over a moss-green shirt, and the steady posture of someone accustomed to large dogs. "You must be Mara. And you must be the person Graham has been emailing like he's buying a helicopter." Dana laughed. Graham did not. Dana explained that High Timber placed retired or displaced working dogs into suitable homes, not necessarily as service animals. The first German Shepherd they met was calm, responsive, and easy around strangers. Graham liked him immediately. Mara noticed. "He's easy," she said. "That's not a criticism." "No, it's your favorite word." They met 2 more dogs. Mara was polite with both. Then she heard claws shift once against rubber flooring at the far end of the room. "What dog is over there?" A large black and tan German Shepherd stood behind a low training barrier, apart from the others. A dark saddle covered his back. A black mask framed amber-brown eyes, and the tip of his right ear leaned slightly outward, while the left stood straight. "That's Rook," Dana said. "Why isn't he coming over?" "Because nobody asked him to." Mara smiled. "I like that answer." Dana explained that Rook was 5. He had belonged to Evan Cole, a working dog trainer who had worked with High Timber. After Evan died in a traffic accident, his family legally transferred Rook to the center. Rook knew obedience and structured work, but he was neither a police tracking dog nor a guide dog. "What's the problem?" Graham asked. "Sudden metal impacts, hard braking, engines revving close by, anything too similar to the accident. He doesn't attack. Mostly he withdraws or stops taking direction. And placement? 2 attempts. Both homes pushed him too hard when he hesitated. Then he's not right for Mara. Mara turned toward him. Do you need a dog you can trust? Or do I need a dog I can live with? Both. But I have to decide first. Dana waited through the silence. Finally, Graham said, "One controlled meeting." Rook entered on a loose leash. Dana stopped several yards from Mara and unclipped him inside the enclosed room. Mara sat on a low bench with her cane against one knee. She did not extend a hand. "Hi, Rook." The dog watched. Mara spoke again after a while, not to call him closer, but to ask Dana about feeding schedules. Then she became quiet. A metal tray crashed in the next room. Rook moved instantly. His head snapped toward the sound. His body tightened. He backed away, eyes searching the room. Graham stepped toward Mara. "Enough. Wait. Mara, please." Rook's breathing had changed. Mara could hear it, quick and shallow. She stayed seated. Dana did not touch him. "It's all right," Mara said softly. "You don't have to come over." Rook remained near the far wall. Mara rested her hands in her lap. "I'm still here." Several seconds passed. Then Rook turned his head toward her voice. One paw moved, then another. He crossed part of the room, stopped once, and finally lowered himself to the floor, less than 3 feet from Mara. He did not touch her. She did not reach for him. Dana looked at Graham. "That's more than he did on his first 2 placement meetings." "Because she did nothing," Graham said. "Exactly." That became the first real change of the day. Graham had spent years treating hesitation as something to remove quickly. Mara had just shown him that sometimes waiting was an action too. On the drive home, he stayed quiet until Mara said, "I want the trial." He startled hard. So did I. He may never be predictable enough. Neither am I. That's not funny. I wasn't joking. Graham's hand tightened on the wheel. Locks, schedules, radios, road conditions. Those were things he understood. For 8 years, he had tried to remove as many variables from Mara's life as possible. Now, she was asking him to let one into their home. Back at High Timber, Dana prepared a supervised trial placement agreement, emergency contacts, feeding instructions, and evaluation dates. If the placement failed, Rook would return to the center, without blame attached to Mara or the dog. Graham read every page. Mara signed where Dana indicated. By evening, snow was falling again when they reached the cabin. Graham opened the front door. Warm air carried the smell of pine wood and coffee. Rook stopped on the porch. He looked inside, then toward the dark yard. Mara waited just beyond the doorway. She did not tug the leash. Rook. That was all. Snow gathered lightly along his shoulders. Then he stepped across the threshold. Graham closed the door behind them. Later that night, a snowplow came up the road. Its blade struck buried ice with a sharp metallic crack. Rook shot to his feet beside the hearth. Mara sat up. She heard his nails scrape once against the floor, then the fast rhythm of his breathing. Graham had already turned toward him. Mara raised one hand. "Give him a second." The snowplow moved farther away. The cabin became quiet again. Rook stayed rigid in the middle of the room. Mara reached for her cane, stood, and spoke softly toward the sound of his breathing. Bringing Rook home, she understood, had been the easy part. 3 mornings after Rook came home, Graham dropped a socket wrench in the mudroom. The tool struck the wooden floor with a hard metallic crack. Rook vanished from the doorway before Graham could bend to pick it up. By the time Graham straightened, the German Shepherd had retreated into the living room and positioned himself beside the far wall, body rigid, amber eyes fixed on the mudroom. Graham started toward him. "Don't," Mara said from the kitchen. Graham stopped. Mara stood at the counter in her navy sweater, one hand resting beside Rook's food bowl. She had heard the retreating claws and knew exactly what had happened. Instead of following the dog, she finished measuring his breakfast. "Rook," she called once, "food's here." Nothing happened. Graham looked toward the living room. He needs to learn that a dropped wrench isn't a threat. He will. How? By finding out nothing happens after it. Dana Kerr had given Mara almost the same advice during their first follow-up at High Timber. Do not chase him when he withdraws. Do not tighten the leash because you are nervous. Do not turn every frightened response into a crisis. Make the next safe thing predictable and let him choose to return. So Mara waited. A minute later came the quiet tap of claws against the floor. Rook appeared at the kitchen entrance, stopped, then crossed to his bowl. Mara did not praise him as though he had accomplished something miraculous. She simply touched the counter twice before lowering the food, the same signal she had used every morning since his arrival. That became their rhythm over the next 2 weeks. Mara said Rook's name before touching his shoulder. She warned him before opening the back door. She used the same short phrase when they moved from one room to another. Rook learned the pattern quickly. He still watched every entrance. An engine revving too close to the cabin could make his muscles tighten. And once, when Graham split a piece of frozen firewood outside, the sharp sound sent Rook into the hallway. But the dog recovered faster each time. More importantly, Rook began making choices of his own. He stopped sleeping near the front door every night, and sometimes settled beside Mara's chair. When she moved to another room, he often followed, not because she called him, but because he had decided that was where he wanted to be. He never guided her. Mara still used her white cane and counted turns through unfamiliar spaces. Rook was not a substitute for those skills. He was simply becoming part of her awareness, a breathing presence, a collar shifting nearby, paws changing rhythm when wood became tile. Graham noticed all of it. He also noticed how often he wanted to interfere. The problem became obvious the afternoon Mara announced she was taking a container of stew to Edith Rowan. "Fine," Graham said. "I'll walk with you. You can drive me to the north end of Maine." "I said I'll walk with you." "And I said you can drive me." Mara stood beside the cabin door in her navy parka, black sunglasses already on, white cane folded in one hand, and Rook's leash in the other. Graham was wearing his olive winter jacket over his camouflage shirt. His left thumb brushed once across the edge of his black tactical watch. "The sidewalks are icy. I know. There's delivery traffic today. I know. And Rook's still adjusting. That's why we have to actually take him places." Graham looked at the dog. Rook stood calmly beside Mara, right ear tip angled slightly outward, waiting. Mara lowered her voice. "If you walk 3 feet behind me the whole time, I'm not doing this. You are." That was harder to argue with. 20 minutes later, Graham parked near the general store and watched Mara start down the familiar stretch of sidewalk toward Edith's house. He stayed well back, close enough to reach her if something happened, far enough that she could pretend he was not there. For the first block, nothing did. Mara's cane tapped a steady rhythm along the edge of the walkway. Rook moved at her right side on a relaxed leash. He did not pull. At the corner, Mara stopped when her cane found the curb, listened for traffic, then continued. A delivery truck was unloading near the hardware store when a length of chain slipped from the back. It hit the pavement with a violent metallic clatter. Rook recoiled. The leash tightened for half a second as he moved sideways. His ears went back and his body lowered. Graham was already walking forward when Mara lifted one hand. "Stay there." He stopped. Rook stared toward the truck. The driver froze, clearly unsure whether to move. Mara did not pull the dog toward her. "Rook." His breathing was quick. She waited. The street continued around them. A door opened somewhere behind the bakery. Tires rolled over packed snow. Someone pushed a cart across the sidewalk. Then Rook turned his head toward Mara. The leash softened. He took one step back toward her, then another. Mara said nothing until he was beside her again. She touched his shoulder once. "Okay." And they kept walking. Graham remained where she had told him to stay. Something about that bothered him more than he expected. Not because Mara had been wrong, because she had been right, and because Rook had returned without Graham fixing anything. Edith Rowan's house sat behind a short fence near the older part of Hearthpine. Edith answered the door, wearing a brick-red sweater beneath a heavy cardigan, her short silver hair curling around her cheeks. At 74, she was small, quick on her feet, and had the habit of speaking to Mara normally instead of raising her voice, as though blindness affected hearing. "You brought reinforcements," Edith said when she noticed Rook. "He's still deciding whether we're worth keeping." Edith laughed and invited them inside. Graham stayed only long enough to carry in the stew, then took Mara at her word and left to pick up supplies at the general store. For nearly half an hour, Mara sat at Edith's kitchen table, while Rook rested beneath it. The conversation moved from weather to village news, before Edith mentioned the coldest winter Hearthpine had seen in years. "Not this one," she said. "8 winters back. We had nights so cold the fuel trucks could barely keep up." Mara ran one finger around the rim of her mug. "That was the year of the accident." Edith became quieter. "Yes." She told Mara that several older households had received heating fuel assistance that winter through Hearthpine Fuel Cooperative. The records showed deliveries arriving on schedule. Edith's own account said her tank had been filled twice. "But it wasn't," she said. "You complained." "More than once. They showed me the ledger. Dates, quantities, everything. According to that book, I had all the fuel I was supposed to have. What happened? I decided I was the problem." Edith gave a small, embarrassed laugh. "I thought maybe I'd used more than I remembered. Your father didn't." Mara went still. "My dad?" "Luke helped with some of their records. He came by after I complained a second time. Sat right where you are." Mara leaned forward. "What did he say?" "Not much. Your father didn't like talking until he was sure. But I remember one thing." Edith's chair shifted softly. "He said numbers don't know how to lie. People do the lying for them." When Graham returned, Mara was waiting by the gate. She asked about Luke before they had even reached the truck. "You knew he checked records for the fuel cooperative?" "A little." "What does a little mean?" "He volunteered with bookkeeping sometimes. Your father was good with numbers." "Edith says people were missing fuel." Graham opened the passenger door, then stopped himself before reaching for Mara's elbow. "I never heard that." "You're sure?" "Yes." There was no hesitation in his answer, and Mara believed him. That evening, Rook ate, followed Mara from the kitchen to the living room, and settled near her chair, while Graham brought in firewood. For the first time, Mara felt that the dog's presence in the cabin no longer seemed temporary. Then, sometime after 10, Rook stood. No truck had passed. Nothing had fallen. There was no sudden noise at all. He walked to the back door and lowered his nose toward the gap beneath it. Mara heard him pace once along the wall. "Rook?" He did not return. The next morning, Graham found the tracks. A single set of boot prints came from the narrow service road behind the property, crossed near the outside fence, and stopped beside the woodshed. From there, whoever had made them would have had a clear view through the living room window. Nothing was missing. No lock had been touched. The prints simply turned back toward the road. Graham studied them, then said, "Could have been somebody from a delivery crew who took the wrong turn." Mara stood several feet behind him in her winter coat and black sunglasses, cane planted in the snow. If they took the wrong turn, why did they stop long enough for Rook to notice them? Graham looked toward the road. He had no answer. That night, an engine accelerated somewhere beyond the trees. Mara's hand stopped over the radio beside her chair. Rook lifted his head. After a moment, Mara said, "There are things from that night I still remember." Graham turned toward her. The brakes, Mom calling Dad's name, and a man outside the car. His face changed before he could hide it. Mara heard the silence. "I don't remember everything he said," she continued. "But I remember his voice." Graham looked toward the dark window. "If I heard it again," Mara said, "I think I'd know." He answered too quickly. "You don't need to think about that tonight." Mara noticed. She did not push him. The tracks did not return the following night. Rook still chose the floor beside the back door instead of his usual place near Mara. Rook had slept beside the back door for 2 nights when Sheriff Jonah Price called Graham about the relay station. A light snow had started before noon, thin enough to leave the road open, but wet enough to interfere with an old communications unit on the ridge above Hearthpine. Jonah needed someone who knew the access trail and the backup wiring. Graham had helped the volunteer rescue team maintain the system before, and under normal circumstances, he would have gone without thinking twice. This time, he stood in the kitchen with the phone still in his hand and looked toward Mara. She was sorting clean laundry at the table. Her black sunglasses rested beside her folded white cane. Rook lay near her chair, awake but relaxed. "No," Graham said into the phone. "Find somebody else." Mara stopped folding. Jonah's voice carried faintly through the receiver. "I can, but you're 10 minutes from the service road and you know that panel better than anyone." I said no. Graham ended the call. Mara waited until he set the phone down. "Because of me? Because somebody was behind this cabin 2 nights ago. And nobody came back. That doesn't mean anything. It means nobody came back." Graham crossed to the window. The tracks from the woodshed had disappeared beneath fresh snow, but he still knew where they had stopped. Mara folded another shirt. "How long would you be gone?" "Couple hours." "Then go." "No." Her hands became still. "Graham." He turned. She rarely used his first name unless she wanted him to hear the next sentence exactly as she meant it. "If you can't leave this house for 2 hours because I'm here, then you're protecting your fear. You're not protecting me." His jaw tightened. Mara stood and reached for her cane. "I have a phone. The backup radio works. The doors lock. Edith knows I'm here. Rook is here." "Rook is not a security system." "I know that. And if anybody comes to the door, I don't open it. You call me first." "I know." "You call Jonah if you can't reach me." "I know." Graham looked toward Rook. The German shepherd lifted his head, amber eyes following him. There were procedures Graham trusted, because procedures gave uncertainty somewhere to go. Before leaving, he checked Mara's phone battery, tested the handheld radio, cleared snow from the back steps, and confirmed that Edith was home. Mara tolerated all of it until he checked the front lock for the second time. "That one didn't change in 30 seconds, she said. Graham took his hand off it. The last thing Mara heard before his truck pulled away was the slow crunch of tires over packed snow. For the first hour, the cabin felt ordinary. Mara reheated soup, listened to an audiobook, and let Rook settle near the hearth. Wind brushed lightly against the exterior wall. The wood stove clicked as it cooled and warmed again. Somewhere in the distance, a snow machine crossed a road and faded away. Rook remained quiet. Mara began to relax. At a little past 7, the dog stood. No loud noise had preceded it. Mara paused the audiobook. Rook walked across the room toward the back door. His nails made 4 measured taps against the floor, then stopped. Rook. He lowered his nose near the bottom of the door. A quiet rumble formed in his chest. Mara straightened. This was not the startled reaction she had learned over the last few weeks. Rook was not retreating from something. He was facing it. Mara reached for her cane and stood. Outside, snow compressed beneath a boot. 1 step, then another. The sound stopped close to the wall. Mara felt the muscles in her shoulders tighten. "Who's there?" For a moment, nothing answered. Then a man's voice came through the door. "Graham asked me to bring something over." Mara did not move closer. "What?" "Equipment from the relay station. He's on his way back." Rook's growl deepened. Mara's grip tightened around the cane. Graham had said nothing about sending anyone. "What's your name?" A pause. "Just open up. I'll put it inside and go." Rook barked. The sound filled the cabin. The man outside shifted his weight. Mara took 1 careful step toward the door, not because she trusted him, but because she needed to hear clearly. The cabin had an inner deadbolt and a secondary safety latch. She released only the deadbolt, leaving the second restraint in place, and opened the door no wider than the latch allowed. Cold air entered through the gap. "Leave it outside," she said. For half a second, there was no movement. Then boots struck the porch hard from the side. Someone had not been standing directly in front of the door. Rook moved before Mara could react. He crossed the short space between them and planted himself in front of her, shoulders filling the narrow opening. His bark changed, lower, sharper, continuous. Mara stepped backward immediately. The man reached the porch. Rook did not cross the threshold. He held it. "Get that dog back," the man snapped. Mara froze, not because of the words, because of the voice. Something inside her opened before she was ready. Rain against glass. Her mother breathing too quickly. Her father saying, "Mara, get down." A vehicle close behind them. Headlights she could still remember from the days when she could see. And a man shouting from somewhere outside the car. She had not remembered the sentence. She remembered the rhythm. The same hard pressure on certain words. The same voice. The man outside took another step, but Rook's body remained between them. "Your father should have left those books," Rook barked over the rest. The sentence broke apart. Mara's mouth went dry. "Pike." The porch went silent. Just 1 second. But the silence told her more than an argument would have. Then distant headlights swept across the trees. An engine turned into the drive. "Graham." The man stepped off the porch. Mara heard boots hit the snow, then rapid movement toward the service road. Rook surged forward once, but stopped at the doorway when Mara said his name. "Rook, stay." The dog remained with her. Graham's truck stopped hard outside. He saw a dark figure moving between the trees and instinctively turned toward the road. Then Mara called from the doorway. "Uncle Graham!" He abandoned the road instantly. By the time he reached her, the other vehicle was already starting somewhere beyond the trees. "You hurt?" "No." "Did he touch you?" "No." "Rook?" "He's fine." Graham checked anyway. Hands over Rook's shoulders, neck, legs. No injury. Then his attention returned to Mara. She was shaking, though her voice remained controlled. "I know who it was." Within 20 minutes, Sheriff Jonah Price arrived with another local officer. Jonah was 56, broad through the chest, with steel gray hair, a neat gray mustache, and a habit of writing before offering opinions. His brown sheriff's winter jacket was dusted with snow when he stepped onto the porch. He listened to Mara twice without interrupting. The officers photographed the prints near the back wall, tire impressions on the service road, and the disturbed snow beside the porch. Nothing had been forced. Nothing had been taken. Jonah wrote down the unfinished sentence exactly as Mara remembered it. Your father should have left those books. Books? Graham asked. That's what he said. Jonah looked at him. Mean anything to you? No. Mara turned toward Graham's voice. Edith said Dad checked fuel records. Graham did not answer immediately. Jonah closed his notebook halfway. We're not building conclusions tonight. Graham looked toward the dark road. We're not staying here tonight either. Mara faced him. Yes, we are. No. I'm not leaving my home every time someone decides I should be afraid. This isn't about proving something. No, it's about you deciding again. Graham's restraint broke just enough for the truth underneath it to show. I almost got back too late. The room went still. Mara heard the words differently from the others. Not, I got back late. Not, I was worried. Almost too late. As though Graham had been measuring his life against that possibility long before tonight. She did not challenge him then. Jonah finished with the scene and stepped outside to make several calls. Graham remained by the window. Rook settled near Mara but kept his head turned toward the rear of the cabin. Nearly half an hour later, Jonah returned. The notebook was gone. His expression had changed. I checked Pike's status. Graham turned. Jonah looked first at him, then at Mara. Wesley Pike was released 11 days ago. By 9 the next morning, Sheriff Jonah Price had 3 folders open across his desk, and Graham standing on the wrong side of it. You're not going, Jonah said. Graham's expression did not change. I didn't say I was. You were about to. Mara sat in a chair near the window with Rook lying at her feet. Her black sunglasses hid her eyes, but her face had gone still in the way Graham recognized as a tension, not calm. She had heard enough of the conversation to understand what Jonah meant. The sheriff tapped one of the folders. Pike's registered address is in Elk County. Parole officer confirmed he checked in there yesterday afternoon. And last night? Graham asked. No verified contact after 6. So he could have driven here. He could have driven a lot of places. You heard Mara. I heard Mara. I also saw the tracks. I saw the tire impressions. None of that gives me lawful grounds to pick up Wesley Pike. Graham leaned one hand against Jonah's desk. Jonah looked at it. Take the hand off the desk. Graham did. The exchange lasted only a few seconds, but Mara understood the real argument. Graham believed danger justified movement. Jonah believed movement without evidence could destroy whatever case they might eventually have. Jonah opened the oldest folder. 8 years earlier, Wesley Pike had worked as a driver and route coordinator for Hearthpine Fuel Cooperative. He had known Luke Bennett through the cooperative's bookkeeping work. Pike had been convicted after investigators established a pattern of threats against Luke, dangerous conduct involving the vehicle that followed the Bennett family on the night of the crash, and interference during the investigation that followed. The charges had been serious, but they had not been framed as a planned attempt to murder the family. That distinction explained something Mara had never considered before. Pike had been punished, but not forever. He served most of the sentence, Jonah said. Parole wasn't a surprise. It was scheduled. It was a surprise to us, Mara said. Jonah's mouth tightened slightly. You should have been notified. Graham looked at him. Should have? I'm checking why you weren't. That answer did not satisfy Graham, but Mara heard the difference between blame and fact. Jonah was not defending the system. He was refusing to pretend it had done something it had not. Rook shifted beneath Mara's chair and rested his head across one paw. What about the books? Mara asked. Jonah turned toward her. The thing he said about my father. Graham's jaw tightened again. Jonah closed the old criminal file and reached for a thinner folder. That part bothered me, too. Over the next several hours, Jonah followed a different trail. Not police reports, not witness statements, administrative records. Pike, or someone acting on his behalf, had filed several written requests over the years. Some asked whether Luke Bennett's personal property had ever been released to family. Others asked whether Hearthpine Fuel Cooperative records from that period still existed. One request specifically asked whether any duplicate materials submitted by Luke Bennett had been retained by the county. Mara leaned forward. He asked about copies? More than once. Graham stared at the page Jonah was holding. Why would a man in prison care about bookkeeping records 8 years later? That, Jonah said, is a useful question. Mara thought about the porch. Your father should have left those books. Until that moment, Pike's return had looked simple. Ugly, but simple. He hated the family who helped put him away. Now the shape of it changed. Revenge could explain why Pike came to the cabin. It did not explain why he had spent years asking where Luke's records went. Graham saw the same problem. So he wasn't just there for Mara. Jonah did not answer immediately. No, he said at last. I don't think he was. That was the first answer. It only opened a larger question. By early afternoon, Jonah suggested they go to Hearthpine Fuel Cooperative. The building stood behind the northern edge of the village, part office, part warehouse, with 2 old loading bays facing a yard marked by tire grooves frozen into the snow. The cooperative had been reorganized since the Bennett accident, but several employees from that period still lived in Hearthpine. One of them had agreed to meet. Martha Keene was 68, small-framed, with white-gray hair cut just below her ears, and a voice that carried the firmness of someone who had spent decades correcting drivers, invoices, and delivery schedules. She wore a navy-quilted vest over a wool shirt and kept a pencil tucked behind one ear. When Mara entered with her cane and Rook beside her, Martha greeted her without hesitation. You have your mother's mouth. Mara smiled faintly. I've been told that. Martha looked at Graham next. You have your own. Jonah almost smiled. They met in a side office that smelled faintly of paper, diesel, and old wood. Rook settled near Mara's chair, while Jonah explained that they were trying to understand what Luke had been reviewing before his death. Martha's expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. He started with routes, she said. What kind of routes? Mara asked. Fuel deliveries, houses assigned to certain trucks, which driver went where, which tank got filled and when. She pulled an old blank delivery form from a drawer and placed it on the table. Every delivery had a quantity, a destination, a driver entry, and a receiver confirmation. Luke noticed some trips that looked complete on paper, but didn't fit the actual schedule. Jonah asked, What didn't fit? Martha counted on her fingers. Fuel leaving the main tank without matching mileage. Driver names attached to routes those drivers said they never ran. Deliveries marked complete on days, roads were closed. A few signatures that didn't look right. Mara remembered Edith Rowan. People said they were getting less fuel than the records showed. Martha looked at her. Yes. Graham straightened slightly. You knew that? I knew people were complaining. I didn't know why. Who did? Martha paused. Luke thought someone did. Jonah asked the next question carefully. Who? Calvin Mercer. The name landed differently than Pike's, not because Graham recognized a criminal, because he recognized a respectable man. Calvin Mercer had chaired the Hearthpine Fuel Cooperative for nearly 15 years. He had spoken at church fundraisers, helped negotiate winter supply contracts, and organized emergency deliveries during storms. Graham knew the face. Everybody in Hearthpine did. You're saying Mercer was involved? Graham asked. No. Martha's answer came fast. I'm saying Calvin knew the numbers were wrong before Luke did. That distinction mattered. Martha explained that Luke and Calvin had argued twice in the week before the crash. The arguments had not been secret, but nobody had understood their importance at the time. Luke wanted discrepancies documented and reported beyond the cooperative. Calvin wanted the issue handled internally until they knew more. Why? Mara asked. Martha looked toward the window. That winter was bad, worse than this one. Supply was tight. Half the older homes in the valley depended on us. Still doesn't explain silence, Graham said. No, Martha replied. It explains fear. Graham said nothing after that. Martha opened a cabinet and removed an old root binder. She did not claim it contained evidence. Most of the useful documents from 8 years earlier had been transferred, archived, or disposed of according to routine schedules. But Luke had worked from copies. Martha remembered because he had been careful about originals. He didn't trust leaving the only set here. Jonah leaned closer. Where did he take them? I don't know. Mara frowned. Home? No. Martha answered with enough certainty that everyone looked at her. How do you know? Because I asked him. The room went quiet. Martha seemed to hear the old conversation again before she spoke. Luke was angry that day. Not loud. Your father wasn't a loud man, but angry. I told him not to carry that material around if Pike was already bothering him. Mara's fingers tightened around the handle of her cane. What did he say? Martha looked directly toward her. He said if anything happened to him, it wouldn't matter. Graham's posture changed. Jonah asked, Why not? Martha took the pencil from behind her ear and set it down. Because the copies had already left Hearthpine. No one spoke for several seconds. Rook lifted his head at the change in the room, then settled again when Mara rested one hand lightly against his shoulder. On the drive back, Graham said little. Mara sat beside him, replaying Martha's words. Not hidden in the cabin, not carried in Luke's truck, not destroyed in the crash. Sent somewhere. Pike had spent years asking about copies he might never have known were already gone. Mara turned her face toward Graham. Did Dad ever tell you he sent anything out of town? No. You're sure? Yes. This time she heard no evasion, only frustration. Graham tapped his thumb once against the edge of his black watch. For 8 years, he had believed the most dangerous thing connected to that night was already known. A man. A car. A threat. Now there was something else. A record of whatever Luke had discovered. And someone had cared enough about it to keep asking where it went. The following morning, Calvin Mercer opened the door before Graham finished knocking. He was 63, thin through the shoulders, with silver hair combed to one side and a dark cardigan over a gray-green flannel shirt. A worn wedding ring flashed when he gripped the door. He looked at Jonah, then Mara and Rook, and finally Graham. I figured you'd come. Inside, Mara sat beside a small table, while Rook settled near her boots. Jonah remained standing. We're trying to understand what Luke Bennett found 8 years ago, Jonah said. Calvin folded his arms. There were bookkeeping problems. That's all anyone knew. Jonah placed a photocopy on the table. Your signature is on this. It was an internal review from that winter. Fuel leaving the cooperative's main tank did not match the quantities documented at several destinations. The report predated Luke's copies. Graham saw Calvin's face change. You knew. I knew numbers were off. You knew enough to sign that. Jonah waited. Calvin turned towards the window. Pike controlled several rural routes. Some days he switched drivers. Some days he claimed weather forced him to consolidate deliveries. At first it looked sloppy. And then? Mara asked. Luke compared mileage, tank levels, and customer complaints. The rest came slowly. Pike had been diverting part of the heating fuel assigned to subsidized households. He moved it through a small trucking company connected to an acquaintance outside Hearthpine, then sold it where winter prices were higher. The cooperative records still showed full deliveries. The people who lost fuel were the least likely to challenge the paperwork. Older residents, widows, families living far outside the village. People like Edith Rowan. Mara rested a hand on Rook's shoulder. His breathing stayed slow. "How long did you know?" Graham asked. Calvin rubbed his wedding ring. "Long enough. I saw the pattern before Luke did." Calvin explained that winter had already strained Hearthpine's supply. Roads had closed repeatedly. If the cooperative was shut down for an investigation, even temporarily, hundreds of homes could have been left waiting for heat. "So you did nothing," Graham said. "I thought I was buying time." "For Pike? For the town. I thought I could remove him after the worst cold passed." "What did Luke want?" Mara asked. "To report everything immediately. And you said no. I told him we needed proof and time." Calvin looked down at his hands. Luke, he explained, had answered that the people Calvin claimed to be protecting were already the ones sitting in colder houses. Waiting until spring would not return the fuel they needed in January. Graham stepped closer. "You knew there was danger and still chose to let it continue." The sentence came out hard. Then Graham stopped. Something in his own words caught him. Mara heard the silence. Jonah did too, but said nothing. Calvin looked down. "Luke started copying records because he stopped trusting the originals to remain here. That was when Pike realized what he was doing." They left with more answers, but Graham barely spoke. At the cooperative office, Jonah went inside to meet Martha again. Mara stayed near the truck with Rook, while Graham stood beside the hood, snow gathering on his olive jacket. "You went quiet back there," Mara said. "I'm thinking." "No. You're hiding." Graham exhaled. "Your mother called me that night." Mara did not speak. "Elise said Pike had been around the house. Luke was worried. She asked me to stay." "What did you do?" "I told her to lock the doors. Call the sheriff if Pike came back." "And then?" "I left." Graham's hand closed around the edge of his black watch. "If I'd stayed..." Mara did not stop him. She asked, "How long have you thought that?" 8 years. Every unnecessary warning, every hand reaching for her elbow, every door checked twice, suddenly meant something different. It had not only been protection, it had been penance. Rook rose from beside Mara and leaned lightly against her leg. She rested her hand on the thick fur at his neck, without taking her attention from Graham. For once, she did not need her uncle to decide what she should feel. Before either could say more, Jonah returned with Martha. The investigation was moving. Martha helped locate surviving cooperative material. Jonah began contacting households from the old route lists. 17 showed discrepancies worth reviewing. Memory alone was not enough. Edith remembered missing fuel. Another resident, Howard Pell, remembered being told his family must have used more than expected. Others remembered little. So Jonah worked from records: fuel leaving the main tank, delivery slips, driver schedules, customer signatures, and invoices tied to the outside trucking company Pike had used. The numbers began to align with Luke's concerns. Mara remembered Martha's words from the day before. "The cuz had left Hearthpine." Martha nodded. "He said something about county." Jonah called the county records and audit office. Rebecca Sloan returned the call before sunset. She was 51, with short auburn brown hair threaded with gray, a precise speaking voice, and no patience for turning paperwork into something mysterious when it might simply have an intake number. Luke Bennett had submitted a packet 8 years earlier. Rebecca found the entry. The packet went to an administrative audit unit several days before the crash. Because Luke died before completing a formal complaint, and because the criminal case focused on Pike's threats and the vehicle pursuit, the audit material had never been properly linked to the criminal file. It had not vanished. It had been filed under a different process. Rebecca followed the intake code into long-term storage. The copies were still there. Nobody celebrated. Luke had done exactly what he said he would do. The system received the material, but two separate processes failed to connect the same truth. The copies supported the pattern Jonah had already begun rebuilding. They did not prove everything by themselves, but they turned old suspicions into something measurable. And they explained Pike's obsession. For 8 years, Pike had apparently believed those records were still with the Bennett family. That belief had brought him back to Mara's door. Late that afternoon, Jonah's phone rang again. He listened, then hung up. Someone tried to get into the cooperative's old storage section last night. Graham turned. Pike? Camera didn't get a face. What were they after? The door they tried was the one closest to the historical records. That night, Mara sat beside the hearth with Rook across her feet. Graham stood near the window. She had not finished with what he told her. You were wrong to leave that night, she said. Graham did not defend himself. But you weren't driving the car behind my parents. His shoulders remained still. You don't get to take Pike's part of it just because you need somewhere to put your guilt. Graham looked at her. For once, he had no answer. Outside, the temperature was falling fast. By morning, Hearthpine was expected to enter the coldest stretch of the winter, and the fuel cooperative was preparing to open its emergency storage. By sunrise, the temperature in Hearthpine had dropped 12 degrees. The cold came hard and dry, tightening the snow on rooftops and turning every breath outside into white vapor. 2 neighborhoods lost power before breakfast. By 8, Hearthpine Fuel Cooperative had opened its emergency storage and started preparing deliveries for elderly residents and homes that could not safely wait for electricity to return. Graham was already there when Sheriff Jonah Price arrived, not inside the police perimeter, not carrying a weapon. He stood beside a county map taped to the hood of a utility truck and pointed out the old service roads behind the cooperative. This one looks open on paper, Graham said, but the north end washed out 3 years ago. This trail still connects to the logging road. If somebody wants to leave without using Main Street, that's the route. Jonah marked it in his notebook. That's enough. Graham looked at him. Jonah closed the notebook. You've given me the terrain. Now you leave the police work to us. I know. Do you? Graham held his gaze. Yes. That answer mattered more than Jonah let show. Earlier that morning, Mara had agreed to spend the day at High Timber with Dana. It had been a discussion, not an order. Jonah explained the risk. Graham explained the cold and the likelihood of police activity around the cooperative. Mara made the decision herself. Rook had gone with her, for a short time. On the drive from High Timber back toward the cabin, Graham had taken Rook along because Dana needed to move several dogs between training areas, and Mara had asked Graham to bring him home before evening. They were on the public road near the cooperative when Rook changed. No loud noise, no metal impact. The German Shepherd simply stopped beside Graham. His nose lifted. His body became still. Then he turned toward a dark pickup parked crookedly along a narrow service lane. Graham did not release the leash. He did not tell Rook to search. He did not approach the vehicle. He looked at the plate, caught only part of the number beneath packed snow, and called Jonah. 20 minutes later, Jonah confirmed the truck was registered to an old acquaintance of Pike's. It had been reported borrowed without permission 2 days earlier. That did not prove Pike was driving it, but it gave the surveillance team one more reason to watch the service road. Rook went back to High Timber with Mara. Graham stayed outside the controlled zone and helped the cooperative with something less dramatic and more useful: redirecting one fuel truck around a frozen loading lane. By late afternoon, the yard had become a working maze of engines, bundled volunteers, county vehicles, and people carrying clipboards. Among them was Howard Pell, 71, thin and white-bearded, wearing an old tan work coat over denim. Howard had once been one of the residents whose heating deliveries did not match the official records. Now he volunteered every winter because, as he told anyone who tried to stop him, "I can still carry a clipboard." Graham saw him twice near the loading bay. Then Jonah's radio traffic changed. Shorter voices, fewer words. A deputy had seen someone enter the old storage section through a staff-only passage. The person had avoided the main office, avoided the fuel area, gone toward the historical records room. Jonah moved his team. Graham stayed where he was. It was harder than he expected. Every part of him wanted information. Distance, direction, a clear line of sight. Instead, he helped a driver back a fuel truck into the alternate lane. Then someone shouted near the rear fence. Graham turned. A man in a faded black winter jacket came out from behind the old storage building. Even at a distance, Graham knew the face. Wesley Pike had gone thinner over 8 years. His dark hair was streaked with gray now, his shoulders narrower than Graham remembered. But the expression had not changed. It was the same fixed resentment of a man who believed consequences belonged to other people. Pike saw Graham. For 1 second, neither moved. Then Pike smiled. "Elise called you that night?" The yard seemed to narrow around Graham. Truck engines faded behind the words. He had heard that sentence in his own head for 8 years. Graham answered, "I know." Pike took a step backward toward the service lane. "And you still left." There it was. The accusation Graham had carried without Pike's help. For years he had supplied the rest himself. If I had stayed, if I had listened, if I had been there. Graham looked at him. "You were the one who followed them." Pike's smile disappeared. Then he ran. Graham's body reacted before his thoughts did. 1 step forward, weight shifting, eyes measuring the distance. He could catch him. Maybe. Then a warning horn sounded behind him. Howard Pell had stepped backward to avoid the sudden movement near the loading area and slipped on a patch of packed ice. He went down beside a slowly reversing fuel truck. The driver braked immediately. Howard tried to rise but could not find his footing. Graham looked once toward Pike, then toward Howard. 8 years ago, he had spent the worst night of his life believing he had been in the wrong place when his family needed him. This time, there was no question where he was needed. Graham turned away from Pike. He crossed to Howard, took him firmly by the arm and shoulder, and moved him clear of the lane. "You hurt?" "Mostly embarrassed." "Good. Stay embarrassed over here." Howard managed a breathless laugh. Graham pulled out his phone and called Jonah. "Pike's on the east service lane, heading toward the logging road." "We see him." That was all Jonah needed. 2 deputies were already positioned beyond the storage yard. Pike reached the end of the lane and found a patrol vehicle blocking the road. He turned back and saw Jonah approaching from the opposite direction. There was nowhere useful left to go. No fight followed. No last charge. Jonah ordered Pike to stop and show his hands. After several seconds, Pike did. The handcuffs closed. Graham watched from beside Howard. He felt no victory, only the strange absence of something he had expected to feel. For years, he had imagined that if Pike ever stood in front of him again, anger would tell him what to do. Instead, the clearest choice he made that day had been turning his back on him. The arrest itself rested on what Pike had done now. He had entered a restricted part of the cooperative without permission. His presence in Hearthpine violated conditions attached to his release. Surveillance placed him near the records area after an earlier unauthorized attempt to reach the same section. The borrowed truck provided another investigative connection. Later, after warrants and proper searches, investigators found material inside the vehicle that deepened the case. Notes about Graham's schedule, the cabin, Mara's visits to High Timber, a rough map of the cooperative, and references to Luke Bennett's records. Jonah was careful when he called Graham. It doesn't prove every old allegation. I know. It does support the stalking, the access attempts, and why he came back. Graham looked through High Timber's front window. Mara was sitting inside with Dana. Rook was beside her. "That's enough for today," Graham said. When he entered, Rook heard him before Mara did. The dog stood quickly, ears forward, but did not rush the door. He watched, recognized Graham, then crossed the room at a steady pace. Mara turned toward the sound. "Is it over?" Graham stopped in front of her. "Pike's part is." Mara was quiet. Then she asked, "What about yours?" Graham looked down at Rook, then at his own left hand, resting near the black watch he had touched through every difficult decision he could not control. For once, he did not reach for it. He simply stood there. "I'm working on it," he said. By the time the first hard edge of winter began to soften, Hearthpine had learned that fixing an old wrong was quieter than uncovering one. There was no parade. No crowd gathered outside the sheriff's office. No one hung a banner over Main Street with Luke Bennett's name on it. Wesley Pike remained in custody while investigators worked through the new charges tied to his return, his attempts to reach the cooperative's old records, and the notes found in the vehicle he had been using. The older case was not suddenly rewritten in a week. It moved through the slow channels it should have moved through years earlier. The county audit did move faster. Using Luke's copies, surviving cooperative records, financial documents, and the route discrepancies Jonah had helped identify, auditors confirmed that multiple Hearthpine households had been credited with fuel they had never actually received. 17 accounts required formal review. The cooperative changed its procedures before the review was finished. Every delivery now required a second verification. Customers received direct confirmation of quantity. Outside audits were scheduled instead of left to internal discretion. Cases involving possible restitution were forwarded to the proper county office instead of being handled quietly inside Hearthpine. Edith Rowan received her letter on a cold Tuesday morning. Mara happened to be there when it arrived. Edith read it twice, then sat at her kitchen table with one hand resting over the page. "All those years," she said. "I thought I was getting forgetful." Mara sat across from her, black sunglasses folded beside her gloves. Rook lay under the table, his tail curled near her boot. "You weren't." Edith gave a small laugh that was not entirely happy. Turns out being right can come 8 years too late and still feel good. Howard Pell had a similar reaction. His family had once blamed him for using heating fuel too quickly during one of the coldest months on record. Now the record showed that at least one delivery had never reached his property in the amount claimed. Howard did not ask anyone to apologize. He simply brought the county letter to the cooperative the next morning, folded it into his coat pocket, and continued helping with winter deliveries. The village changed in small ways. People checked receipts more carefully. Older residents called one another after deliveries. The cooperative board posted every new oversight rule publicly. For the first time in years, the story did not belong only to Graham, Mara, or Pike. It belonged to people who had spent too long thinking their own memory, judgment, or bad luck was the problem. Calvin Mercer stood in front of those people at a community meeting in March. He did not bring notes. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he kept turning his wedding ring once around his finger before speaking. "I knew the numbers were wrong," he said. "I did not know everything Pike was doing, but I knew enough to report it, and I chose to wait." The room stayed quiet. Calvin explained the same fear he had described to Graham, that a sudden investigation in the middle of a brutal winter might shut down deliveries when Hearthpine needed them most. Then he added something he had not said before. I told myself I was protecting the town. I never asked the people who were losing fuel whether they wanted that kind of protection. Some people accepted the apology. Some did not. Calvin did not argue with either response. Graham sat near the back beside Mara. He listened without moving. The words did not feel like an accusation anymore. They felt like a warning he had finally learned how to hear. By spring, High Timber completed Rook's companion placement with Mara. Donna made the limits clear one more time. He is not a guide dog. I know. He does not replace your cane. I know. And if you start letting him make route decisions for you, I will personally come to the cabin and annoy both of you. Mara smiled. That sounds like a threat. It is. Rook stood between them, right ear tip angled slightly outward, watching Dana as if he understood that part. Mara began spending 2 days each week at High Timber. She helped prepare enrichment, recorded notes using assistive technology, and sat in controlled introduction sessions where nervous dogs were learning to tolerate new voices and unfamiliar people. She was good at one part in particular. Waiting. Dana noticed it before Mara did. She never rushed a dog to approach. Rook had taught her patience, but in truth Mara had probably possessed it long before him. The important difference was that she now had somewhere to use it that belonged to her. Graham drove her some mornings. Other days, Dana arranged transport with another staff member from Hearthpine. The first time Mara left the cabin without Graham involved at all, he checked the weather twice and then stopped himself before checking a third time. That became his own kind of practice. He stopped reading labels unless Mara asked, stopped reaching automatically for her elbow, stopped taking Rook's leash from her hand when the village streets grew busy. He still worried. The difference was that worry no longer automatically became an instruction. One morning in town, Mara and Rook passed the hardware store just as a worker dropped a metal snow shovel onto the pavement. The clang was sharp enough to turn several heads. Rook stopped. His body tightened. Mara felt the leash change. She stopped too. Graham, walking several paces behind them, did nothing. Months earlier, he would already have been moving forward. Mara said Rook's name once. The dog stared toward the sound. His breathing quickened, then slowed. A few seconds passed. Rook turned back toward Mara. The leash loosened. They continued walking. Graham watched them go for another half-block before realizing his hand had never touched his watch. The moment was small enough that nobody else noticed. That was why it mattered. By late afternoon, snow had begun falling again over the cabin, soft and dry, settling along the rail and the edge of the steps. Graham and Mara sat on the porch with Rook stretched near her boots. For a while they listened to the trees. Then Graham said, "I spent 8 years thinking if I let you out of reach, something would happen." Mara turned her face toward him. "And now?" He looked down the road. "Now, I think keeping you close enough to calm me might have been another way of losing you." Mara said nothing. She reached across and rested her hand briefly on his shoulder. That was enough. A few minutes later she stood. "I'm going around the lower road before dark." Graham stood automatically. His hand reached toward the olive jacket hanging beside the door, then stopped. He left it there. Mara put on her navy parka and black sunglasses. Her white cane unfolded with 2 familiar clicks. Rook rose beside her. "How long?" Graham asked. 15 minutes. "Phone?" "In my pocket." "Rook." Mara smiled. Rook stood at her right side, calm and waiting. "Right here." Graham nodded. Mara stepped down from the porch. Her cane touched the packed snow ahead of her. Rook moved beside her without pulling, without choosing the route, without trying to become her eyes. He simply went with her. Graham stayed where he was. For 8 years, every yard between himself and Mara had carried the same meaning. Too far. Too late. Danger. Now she moved farther down the road, one measured step at a time, and the distance meant something else. She had a life that did not require him to stand inside every part of it. Rook glanced once toward the cabin, then turned back to Mara. Graham watched until they reached the bend. He did not follow. For the first time since Elisa's phone call 8 years earlier, standing still did not feel like failure. It felt like trust. Sometimes love asks us to hold on. Other times, it asks us to step back and trust the people we care about to find their own way. Graham spent years believing that protecting Mara meant keeping danger away from her. Rook helped him learn something harder. Real protection can also mean giving someone the confidence, freedom, and support to keep walking even when fear is still present. In our own lives, we may not be able to prevent every difficult road for the people we love, but we can choose to stand beside them without taking their choices away. If this story meant something to you, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories about loyalty, courage, and second chances. May your home be filled with peace, and may you have the wisdom to know when to hold someone close and when to let them grow. If you have any feelings, thoughts, or suggestions about this story, would you share them in the comments below so we can listen, learn, and keep making these stories better?